In your precious name, amen. All right, Luke chapter 8.
Pastor, I forgot to mention, Katie and I saw Gracie Fair yesterday,
Okay,
and she was with her mother and all the kids and stuff, so she was acting really normal, just like a kid.
really? Okay,
But I didn't ask your mother for the
sure.
kids, but I think that's interesting.
Absolutely. So she's recovered okay and everything. Brother Dave just mentioned a young girl, Gracie Fair, who I believe was 6 years old. She's on our prayer list. She had surgery on her brain stem, if I'm remembering correctly. But Brother Dave just said he saw her yesterday, and she's recovered just fine and was out with her family and other kids being able to run around. So we're thankful for that recovery, thankful for the Lord working there. We're going to be in Luke chapter 8. I should probably turn there myself, huh? Sitting here telling you to turn there, and I'm not doing it myself. Luke chapter 8. We're kind of continuing on with the lesson last week. We're in the same chapter. Luke chapter 8. What did we look at last week? Who remembers? You get extra points if you remember. You can look there in Luke chapter 8 and look back at what we did last week. It involved a herd of swine. What was it? Right, the Lord healed the maniac of Gadara there and caused the evil spirits to go out. What else happened? Remember, they were in the boat going over to the other side. There was a storm. Who was sleeping? That's right, Lord was asleep. The disciples were afraid of the storm. The Lord wakes up, and what's he say? He rebukes the wind and the sea. He rebukes the waves there. The sea is calm. And so that's kind of the context of where we're at here, that they go across the sea. Let's see, on the other side of the lake, Jesus stills the waves. They get to the other side. He heals the man that was possessed by the demons, the unclean spirits. He casts the spirits out. They go into the swine. And then what do the swine do? Remember, they take off, they go over the cliff, and they all perish. They all die. And so are the people there happy about that? They're not happy about it. And it says they were amazed. And in verse, 37 of chapter 8 says, Then the whole multitude of the country of the Gadarenes round about besought him to depart from them, for they were taken with great fear. And he went back up into the ship and returned back again. So Jesus goes across the lake, heals the man. Then they are fearful. They don't want him there anymore, so they send him back. So he returns back again, and that is where we pick up in our story today in Luke chapter 8, verse 40. We're going to read down through the end of the chapter. The Bible says, And it came to pass that when Jesus was returned, the people gladly received him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue, and he fell down at Jesus' feet and besought him that he would come into his house. For he had one only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she lay a-dying. But as he went, the people thronged him, and a woman having an issue of blood 12 years, which had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any, came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood stanched. And Jesus said, Who touched me? When all denied, Peter and they that were with him said, Master, the multitude thronged thee and pressed thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me? And Jesus said, Somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. And when the woman saw that she was not hid, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately. And he said unto her, Daughter, be of good comfort, thy faith hath made thee whole, go in peace. While he yet spake, there cometh one from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying unto him, Thy daughter is dead, trouble not the master. But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, Fear not, believe only, and she shall be made whole. And when he came into the house, he suffered no man to go in, save Peter and James and John, and the father and the mother of the maiden. And all wept and bewailed her, but he said, Weep not, she is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn, knowing that she was dead. And he put them all out, and took her by the hand, and called, saying, Maid, arise. And her spirit came again, and she arose straightway, and he commanded to give her meat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them that they should tell no man what was done. And so what we find here is the people of the Gadarenes, and verse 37, they requested Jesus to leave, but when Jesus goes back across the lake, the Galileans there were waiting. Verse 40 says, the people gladly received him, for they were all waiting for him. So we see one side, people didn't want him, they wanted him to leave. And on the other side of the lake, people are anticipating his coming, looking forward to his return, eagerly expecting him. That's a little picture there of the coming return of Jesus, how we're going to view it. Are we going to be eagerly anticipating him, or is he going to be gladly received? It kind of gives a little insight into what our attitude should be to the coming of the Lord. And we see a little picture of the rapture here. But we're going to go over these two miracles here this morning and how they kind of are interwoven together. And one thing I have underlined in my Bible as I was studying this, I underlined the first phrase of verse 40. Luke chapter 8, verse 40 says, "And it came to pass." Now, that's I guess you would call it a transitional phrase. That's going from, okay, Jesus was over on the side of the Gadarenes. He healed the demonic man. The swine went over over the cliff. The people sent him away. And then now he's coming back across the lake, and now he's being received on the other side. But in that little phrase there, "and it came to pass," what had to happen for him to get to one side back to the other? He had to go back on the boat, right? He had to go back across the lake. And as I was studying, it struck me that imagine the confidence of the disciples going back across the lake the second time. Remember, they weren't long in the land of the Gadarenes. They weren't there very long. He was just there long enough that this account here tells us to heal the man. And so now these disciples, a few hours earlier, were scared for their life. A few hours earlier, thought everything was lost. They thought everything was out of control. Jesus wakes up. He rebukes the wind. He rebukes the sea. The waves are calm. And now as they're going back, that fear isn't there anymore. That doubt of if they're going to make it doesn't even enter their minds. Imagine the confidence of the disciples going back across the water. And sometimes as I read and study, I like to think of that, really think through how all this works, because the Bible just says, "and it came to pass," but in that phrase, they had to come back across the water. They had to face that same lake. They had to face that same water that once threatened their life and threatened their ship, but now they knew that Jesus had the power over that. Jesus has the power over the wind and over the sea and over the waves. And you can imagine their confidence knowing that, almost feeling invincible because Jesus was with them. And that's what happens when we go through a storm in life and we go through a struggle, we go through a hard time, and we look to the Lord for help. We look to the Lord for strength, and He carries us through. He provides for us. He strengthens us. Then we have confidence for the next trial that comes. We have confidence for the next test that we're put through, knowing that the Lord is in control, knowing the power that He has. But they come across the lake, and Jesus was gladly received there. And notice right away, verse 41, "And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue, and he fell down at Jesus' feet and besought him that he would come into his house." A couple things about this man. We see that he was a man of authority. He was a ruler of the synagogue. This man was a leader. But what's amazing is that even a man of power like this, even a man of having this position, still understood who Jesus was. Still understood the power that Jesus had, and he was a ruler of the synagogue, and he fell down at Jesus' feet. That's the ultimate sign of humility, is it not? He fell down at the feet of Jesus. It says, and he besought him that he would come into his house. This man made this request. He desired Jesus to come into his house. He realized that he didn't have any power to help his daughter. He needed the Lord. But look at what he was losing. He was losing something he loved. Verse 42, "For he had one only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she lay a-dying." Can you imagine that? Has only one child, one little girl, one daughter, 12 years old. This little girl, no doubt, is the most precious thing to him. This little girl, no doubt, is the love of his life. And we see the love wrapped up in this man and him coming in and beseeching the Lord. She was only 12. Imagine the life ahead of her. She was so young. And now she lay there dying, and this man feels helpless. He feels alone. He feels like he's out. He can't control it. No matter what he can do, no amount of money or no amount of position or power can save his daughter. Put yourself in this man's situation and try to identify. I have a little girl. She's only 2.5 years old, and I couldn't imagine seeing her in a situation like this, where helpless. That's one of the worst feelings in the world, especially for a guy, I think, is being helpless. I remember that there's been several times, especially, actually, it was kind of during my wife's pregnancy, during the delivery there. She was going through the pains of childbirth and everything, and I could see her pain. I could see her needing help, but I couldn't do anything. I was kind of helpless, and being helpless is a terrible, terrible feeling, because we like to think that we can make a difference, right? We like to think that we can somehow control the situation. We can somehow have a part in making things better. But this man here was helpless. Helpless is a scary place to be, but he knew where to go for help. She was dying, just lay of dying there, verse 42 says. But we see at the end of verse 42, it says, but as he went, the people thronged him. So this man comes to Jesus. And the Bible doesn't give us Christ's verbal response here, but it indicates that, but as he went, the people thronged him. So this man comes to the Lord, needing his help, explaining the case of what's going on, and Jesus begins to follow this man to his house. But on the way, he's being thronged by this crowd. There's people all around him. According to Noah Webster's dictionary, the word thronged means crowded or pressed by a multitude of people. And as Jesus is going, we know that oftentimes he attracted a crowd. But let's look at verse 43. It says, and a woman having an issue of blood 12 years, which had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any, came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood stanched. That word stanched there means stopped or to be stopped. So we see this woman having an issue of blood 12 years. So she's been afflicted by this for a long time. She's been afflicted by this the amount of time that little girl has been alive. The little girl was 12, and she's had this issue of blood for 12 years. Being sick for 12 years is a long time. Having a chronic condition like that year after year after year is wearing on her, and we know because it says, which had spent all her living upon physicians. This woman was in a terrible physical condition. This woman was poor. She had no money. She spent all of her living, every dime that she had, went to trying to find a cure for this disease, went to trying to find something that would fix her ails, that would cure this issue of blood. It says, neither could be healed of any. She spent all her living on these physicians, and she's tried for years and years to try to find an answer as she suffered. But again, just like this ruler of the synagogue, she knew, no doubt she felt helpless. She had spent years, she spent all of her money, all of her time trying to find an answer, trying to find a solution, trying to be healed, and she couldn't. So what does she do? She comes to Jesus. Verse 44, came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood stanched. Now, reading that verse, one would maybe assume that there was some power in the clothes of Jesus, or maybe the garment that he had some miracle healing powers, but it says there, and immediately her issue of blood stanched. And we'll get to the reason here in a minute, but this woman knew the power of Jesus. This woman understood the healing that could come from him. And as she came, and she just wanted to touch his garment, and she came in full faith. Verse 45, and this is kind of amusing, and Jesus said, who touched me? Now obviously when Jesus asks a question, we've talked about this before, what is the purpose of Jesus asking a question? It's not for him to know the answer. right? He obviously knew who touched him. He knew exactly what happened. Why does he ask the question? He asks it to bring to light, to bring it to the attention of everyone else around him. Whenever the Lord asks the question, it's always for the benefit of somebody else. So he said, "Who touched me?" When all denied, so everyone's saying, "It wasn't me, Lord, I didn't touch you." Peter and they that were with him said, "Master, the multitude thronged thee and pressed thee, and thou sayest, Who touched me?" So you get this idea of Jesus walking through the crowd, and he's walking through the multitude, and people are thronging him. No doubt he's being touched. People are laying hands on him as he's bumping into people as he's walking through. And then he stops and says, "Hey, who touched me?" And Peter is like, "Lord, are you serious? Who touched you? People have been touching you since we've got off the boat. You've been thronged since the moment you stepped onto the land. What do you mean, who touched you?" And Jesus said, "Somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me." Again, Jesus is bringing this miracle to attention. And what we're going to find here is that this woman, her issue of blood stopped. Her issue of blood was healed. When she had that faith and she went to the Lord and she touched his garment, her ailing was over at that point. But why is Jesus bringing it out? Jesus is bringing it out for one, to bring praise and honor to God for his power, but also to point out the faith of this lady, to point out the faith that she had to come and to reach and to touch his garment. Verse 47, "And when the woman saw that she was not hid, she came trembling, and falling down before him." Again, we see that humility exemplified here. "She declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately." So this woman understands that Jesus knows that it's her. She can't hide in the crowd. She can't be hid. She steps forward. She falls trembling. She tells him what happened, explains to the Lord what was going on, explains how she had this issue of blood and now it's healed. Verse 48, "And he said unto her, Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace." We see the amazing faith of this woman and Jesus pointing it out so that people can understand and look to the faith that she had. Jesus responds by addressing her as daughter. Isn't that amazing? When we understand that God is our Heavenly Father. He says, "Daughter." He didn't say woman. He didn't say lady. He said, "Daughter, be of good comfort." He comforts her. "Thy faith hath made thee whole." He pointed out her faith. Everyone in the crowd, the whole multitude there, is seeing what's happening. Because Jesus said, "Who touched me?" Everyone denies. This woman comes forward. She's trembling. But now in front of this whole multitude, Jesus points out her faith. Said, "Be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace." And he points this out to show everyone else around this woman's faith, pronouncing peace upon her. What a wonderful miracle that is. What a wonderful testament of faith. She didn't even want to get the Lord's attention. She knew the power that he had. She went to him in faith, believing that he could heal her. And then verse 49, so it says, "While he yet spake," so while all of this is going on, remember that Jesus is on his way somewhere. He's on his way to the house of Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue here. It says, "While he yet spake, there cometh one from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying unto him, Thy daughter is dead. Trouble not the master." Now, you wonder, again, we're putting ourselves in the position of this ruler of the synagogue here. And Jesus comes back across the lake. This man goes to him. He comes and he asks the Lord for help. He said, "Lord, come to my house. My daughter is sick. I need you." And as they're going through the crowd, as they're walking, Jesus stops to deal with this woman and the issue of blood and to point out her faith. And now the ruler of the synagogue, this man here, he came and he had faith, right? He knew the power Jesus had, and he's coming to him. And the Bible doesn't tell us this, but again, just trying to think logically through the story here, do you think the man was kind of frustrated that Jesus stopped? Do you think maybe he was a little bit annoyed that Jesus was stopped to heal this woman while his daughter is dying? And now he gets word, "Hey, don't worry about it. Your daughter's dead. Trouble not the master any longer. You know what? It's too late. How many times has, in the life of Christ, and we'll see more as we go on, but how many times was Jesus told, hey, it's too late? You weren't here in time. It's too late. We'll see that again with Lazarus and others. But put yourself in this man's shoes, and now he had so much hope. He had so much faith. He thought, Jesus is coming to my house. My daughter can be saved. And he stops and he helps this woman, and now he gets word that it's too late. Your daughter is dead. She's passed. She's not here. She's not with us anymore. But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, fear not, believe only, and she shall be made whole. Again, none of this was done by accident. Jesus wasn't in a hurry to get to this man's house. Because when we see this, the power he has here, it just exemplifies the power of God more and more. Verse 51, and when he came to the house, he suffered no man to go in, save Peter and James and John, and the father and the mother of the maiden. Isn't it amazing? Wouldn't that be so neat to be Peter, James, and John? As you read through the life of Christ, you frequently find these men were kind of the, I guess you say, inner circle of disciples. These men were in pretty much every situation we find the disciples in. And sometimes it's exclusively them. And they're in this house with the Lord. They're about to see this miracle. Verse 52 says, and all wept and bewailed her. The people of the house, they're weeping. They're grieving. They're wailing because of this loss of this young girl. But he said, weep not. She is not dead, but sleepeth. Now remember, Jesus is coming with the intention to heal. Jesus is coming with the intention to prove the power of God, to prove the faith of this ruler of the synagogue here, this man. And he goes and people are crying, and he comes to comfort. He comes to help. He comes to heal. He says, hey, don't cry. It's going to be okay. She's not dead. She's just asleep. And what's their response in verse 53? And they laughed him to scorn, knowing that she was dead. This isn't just an eye roll. This isn't just a chuckle behind his back. This isn't just a, okay, Lord. They laughed him to scorn, openly mocking him now, knowing that she was dead. Knowing. I feel sometimes we doubt the Lord because what we think we know. I feel sometimes we doubt the Lord because from our perspective, from our point of view, it's hopeless. From our point of view, maybe all is lost because of what we think we know. These people, her family, her friends, they thought she was dead. They knew she was dead. But Jesus knew differently. Jesus said, weep not, she's not dead, she sleepeth. And he put them all out and took her by the hand and called, saying, Maid, arise. And her spirit came again, and she arose straightway, and he commanded to give her meat. Wouldn't that be amazing to witness that? Can you imagine the emotional roller coaster that this man Jairus was on? He comes to the Lord in fear, in trembling, needing help, saying, Lord, please. He comes in faith. And then the Lord stops and to heal this woman with the issue of blood, and he gets news that his daughter's dead. So he goes from fear to faith, and now faith to desperate, almost hopelessness. And now the Lord comes and says, weep not, she's only asleep. And then he raises her from the dead, and now we can see the joy. We can imagine the rejoicing that is going on in this family. This little girl, this pride and joy of their life was once dead, but now she's alive. Her spirit came again. Verse 56 says, and her parents were astonished. This man's faith was proven here. He came to Jesus trusting that the Lord could help. He came to Jesus trusting that Jesus could make a difference. And now his faith is proven here. And what's interesting is she rose straightway, verse 55, and he commanded to give her meat. Jesus commands for her to be fed. She is born again, so to speak. Her spirit came again, and Jesus wanted her to be fed, wanted her to have meat. And we can take that as a picture of someone who gets saved, someone who's born again. The first thing that we need to do when someone gets saved is they need to start feeding on the Word of God. They need to get into church. They need to be discipled and start feeding and growing, being nurtured in the Lord. And we see the parents were astonished. They were astonished by this. And this man, his faith was proven, and the power and the mercy of God here was on great display. And it's a wonderful, wonderful passage. It's only 16 verses here, but we see two great miracles of God. The Lord doing wonderful things here. What we find is with this woman with the issue of blood and with this ruler of the synagogue, they both came to the Lord humbly, believing that he could heal them, believing that in his time and in his power, both being helpless. This man was helpless to do anything for his daughter. This woman had tried everything physically possible to heal this issue of blood, and they couldn't. But they came to Jesus. You know, oftentimes I'm afraid that we use Jesus as a last resort, do we not? We try to exhaust all options. We try to do it in our own power as much as we can, and we try to think, well, okay, I can't do this any longer. Now I'll turn to the Lord. And I'm not saying that's what these folks do because they went to the Lord in faith, but I'm just pointing out there are times in our life when we look to the Lord as a last resort, and we need to turn to him from the beginning. We need to seek him at all times, knowing the power he has, coming to him humbly. This man was a ruler of the synagogue. This man was, by the standards of the day, by the rank of the day, he was a more prominent, a more powerful person than Jesus. If he would have walked up to Jesus and said, "Lord, come to my house and heal my daughter," people would have thought that was justified because of his position, because of who he was, his rank there as a ruler of the synagogue. But this man didn't come like that. This man knew how helpless he was. He knew how powerful the Lord was. And he came and sought the Lord, and his faith was proven here. But one last thing to point out, I mentioned it a minute ago. Verse 53 is that word knowing there really sticks out to me this morning. Knowing that she was dead. We must be careful in our lives telling the Lord what we know. And I do it too often myself. I say, "Lord, this isn't going to work. God, this can't happen. God, how is this going to work out? I know that this isn't going to happen. I know that this isn't going to work. I know. And what do we know? We know nothing. Because our vision is right here. Right? Our vision is right in front of us. We have tunnel vision. We can't see everything that's happening. We don't know how God's working behind the scenes. We don't know what he's orchestrating to work through our lives. We have no idea. God has the overall peripheral view. God can see everything. He's looking down and he knows exactly what our needs are. He knows exactly in what timing for us to trust and to have faith. And he knows exactly when he's going to fulfill those needs in our life. Don't limit the Lord telling him what you know. These people here, they laughed him to scorn. Can you imagine the embarrassment? Can you imagine the shame? Mocking the Lord, laughing him to scorn, and then Jesus sends them all out and raises this girl from the dead. Thankfully, the Lord was able to work through this, and through his mercy and power, we saw a great miracle here in this little girl being raised from the dead. But I want to encourage you this morning to trust in what the Lord knows, not in what you know. To trust in what God says, not in what you think. To trust in what his word teaches us, not what the world tells us. oftentimes we try, and it's not even always on purpose. Sometimes it's just a natural sinful reaction for us to react in pride, or for us to try to do things our own way, or for us to try to work things out. And when we tell God what we know, knowing that she was dead, Jesus knew she wasn't dead. Jesus knew she was going to be risen again. Jesus knew what was going to happen in his perfect timing, in his perfect will. So I want to encourage you this morning to trust in what the Lord knows, to come to him when we need help, to look to him whenever there's hard times, and look to him in the good times as well. But when hard times come, you don't have to fight it on your own. That's one of the things we're going to, part of one of our points in this morning's service, we're going to look at is understanding that Jesus said, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Oftentimes we toil and we struggle. And God's saying, hey, I'm here. Come to me. Trust me. Rest in me. I'm here to help you. So I want to encourage you with that this morning. I love this passage. I love these stories of faith and humility and the power of the Lord here. And we'll go ahead and pray, then we'll take a little break.